So a criticism of the channel that I have seen, not often, but occasionally, has been that I only make content for beginner lifters. Now, I don't entirely agree, but here you are. Here is a video for advanced lifters. So I am making some assumptions here. I'm assuming that your effort is on point and you both know how to train hard and are actually doing it on a regular basis. You got to keep sharpening that sword. I'm assuming your diet is on point, sleep, protein intake, stress management, all of these things. That's sort of a baseline at this point. These should all be habitual and things that you don't even really have to think about very much. They are a part of your DNA at this point. Because one thing that I've seen is people who think they're advanced and they start doing these other advanced things, but they lose sight of these basics, and then they actually get worse results than if they had just sort of trained like an intermediate. So don't make that mistake. Make sure you're actually doing these on a regular basis. And I would say that I have personal experience with being an advanced lifter, at least for a few years now. And the number one thing is that you are going to be progressing more slowly. That is the hallmark of what it means to be advanced. It's not hitting certain numbers. It's not being a certain level of jackedness. It is the ability to only progress slowly. So when people are like, I want to be advanced. No, you don't. Maybe you want to look like someone who is advanced. You want to hit some advanced numbers or what you think are advanced numbers, but you don't actually want to be advanced. And so because you will be progressing more slowly, that means that you need to use different forms of progression. A beginner, you can just use basic linear progression, add weight to the bar every single month. Intermediates can probably use a double progression. Advanced lifters might be able to use double progression, especially on new movements, but for movements that have been in your program for a long time, you might accept 5 to 10% increase on a lift in a year. If I could increase my RDLs by 10% increase in a year over year, I would be absolutely thrilled with that. But you look at that on a month-to-month basis or a workout-to-workout basis, that might be a very small amount gained each single session. You might need a triple progression where you also manipulate the number of sets that you are doing. Auto-regulation might come into it more, where you are training maybe a little bit more intuitively at times based on how you feel that day. It might be worth standardizing your technique to the point where you can see these very small progressions, or you might want to just say, fuck it, and not track on some lifts at all. Some lifts I don't even track anymore, and I actually find that I do better with these lifts and I get more out of them by not even writing it down in my training log. Something that a few years ago would have been just blasphemy, sacrilege, but I actually get more out of them if I don't track. Shocking. And so having definitive goals and measuring that progression becomes a little bit of a challenge when your progress is that slow. As a beginner, measuring progress is pretty damn easy. Same with if you're intermediate and you are making gains on a more regular basis. But when you're advanced, those plateaus are going to happen more regularly and they're going to be harder to get through, get over, get around compared to before. That's just the reality of being an advanced natural lifter. Luckily, as an advanced lifter, you know a lot about training. You're really into this shit or you wouldn't be advanced. You wouldn't have gotten to this point. So you probably know about training in a holistic sense, in a historical sense. You've probably talked to a lot of lifters. Maybe you're a content creator. Maybe you're a coach. Maybe you just are really into this stuff. You've read lots of books about it. But most importantly, you know yourself. You know how you respond to each training variable. And if you can't talk about how you respond to various progressions or periodization or tweaking your volume or your intensity or different techniques, you're probably not advanced. You're probably still intermediate. So if something worked in the past, do you double down on that or do you try something new? Let's say you've plateaued, you're not making progress. Do you ratchet things up? Or do you try something new, or do you scale things back? Because just trying the same thing, if you're truly plateaued over the course of many weeks and months, is probably not going to be the thing that gets you over the plateau. You're going to have to do something new, something different. So in terms of volume, if you notice that high volume worked well, do you go really high volume? I mean, I've done 30, 40, 45, 50 sets of back in a week, and I saw great benefits from that. But at a certain point, you kind of have to change another variable. So changing a variable will work until it doesn't. Then you change it more, or you change a different variable, or maybe you change it in the other direction. And knowing what to do is a big part of being advanced and getting to elite. By the way, this video is sponsored by Boostcamp. So I assume you are tracking your training if you are advanced, and you might as well use the best possible way to track it. I've been using Boostcamp for a while now, and I am super happy with how easy it is to use. A lot of functionality, definitely better than my old Excel spreadsheets where I had to like scroll up and try to find the last time I did the lift. Nope, has everything in the history. You can just, well, you still have to scroll up a little bit, but it's a lot easier than sorting through lots of charts and columns and shit like that. So I'm super happy with it. I think that you'll like it as well. And once again, thank you to Boostcamp for sponsoring this video. Frequency. On some muscle groups, I respond really well to frequency. For example, rear delts, traps, anything in the back, frequency, volume, just blast the fuck out of it. But hamstrings, that just doesn't work. Either I start tweaking my hamstrings or I just start going backwards and it just doesn't work as well. What about intensity and loading? I know Natural Hypertrophy has said that his deadlift is now an accessory to his Romanian deadlift, and doing just a little bit of heavy deadlifting has been what has driven progress on another lift. That's a very real thing for a lot of people, and sometimes just a little bit of targeted heavy work can be very, very valuable. In terms of failure, there might be some lifts where failure is just genuinely the beginning for you now. As a beginner, maybe 2 reps in reserve is totally fine in this lift, but now you're advanced, now you're resilient, now you're not sensitive to the training, and on a chest-supported row, failure might just be the start, and sort of the default might be multiple reps beyond failure. You're not going to find a scientific study on this shit, and so don't expect to find a lot of these super specific answers for you in a meta-analysis. There are not many of you at this point, and so I think digging around that side of things is probably not going to get you all the answers. It might get you some hints, but don't expect to have anything concrete on that side of things. The finer details like exercise selection, exercise order, advanced techniques, partials, I think all of these things have much more of a place when you are advanced compared to when you are a beginner. If a beginner comes to me and they get their program back and they're like, hey, coach, you don't have any drop sets. You don't have any beyond failure stuff. Like, well,
you can't handle the
partials.
And my existence, while grotesque and incomprehensible to you, saves
gains.
I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way.
You don't need it, and let's just focus on maybe getting near failure and seeing how you're moving and how you're progressing, and add in that spice, that special sauce. Sauce is not a good word to use for advanced natural lifters, but that special spice is best saved for later. And so for all of these variables, you need to be very, very observant based on how your body reacts, how things feel, how you are progressing. And that does become more difficult when your progressions are slower and they take longer to appear. If you're a beginner, you might see that progress in session to session. Intermediate, week to week to week, certainly month to month. If you're an advanced natural lifter, I mean, your experiments might be like an entire year. You might run a whole year and be like, all right, well, not much seems to happen. I've heard stories like that. I'm not quite at that point yet, but I could totally see in a few years where I do a whole bulk and cut and I kind of arrive at the same point and I need to dig back through my training logs and be like, okay, well, maybe this was not doing so well. Maybe I should have tried this instead. And so your experiments become more difficult to see the fruits of your labor. Number 3, staying healthy, injury prevention, injury management. Now, I say injury management because most advanced lifters that I talk to, they've had some issue in the past where they know if they train a certain way, usually if they train like an asshole, they're going to have that issue again, right? You can do your prehab, you can do your rehab, you can heal something up, you can get stronger, you can bulletproof. But most advanced lifters know that if they do a certain thing, oh, if I squat every day, like my hip starts to hurt a lot, and so I don't do that. I squat in a different way. Or if I do this exercise, I seem to get aches and pains, and it's just not really worth doing. That kind of thing. Greg Knuckles on Stronger by Science, he actually had a chart showing injury rates, and it was basically like the longer you trained, the higher the risk that you've had an injury at some point. And this makes sense. If you've been training a year, you probably haven't had any injury. And if you have, it's probably just not very serious, because maybe you're very sensitive and you think that this is an injury when it's kind of just normal soreness or something. You can't differentiate that. When you've been in the gym for a decade hard, you probably had some issue or another. It shouldn't be like a badge of honor or something. You shouldn't try and get it, but realize that it's likely to come up at some point, and dealing with that is extremely important. So knowing how to rehab injuries, knowing how to get around them, knowing how to stay active and not piss off a particular area, these are all very, very important skills for an advanced lifter that you don't really need as a beginner in most cases. And this is where I think having reasonable technique, moving well, not using excessive loading, not using excessive momentum, and yes, by golly, even the concept of SFR make a lot more sense. I see a lot of people applying these concepts when they either are not needed or might even be counterproductive. Getting more out of less weight makes sense when you're really fucking strong, and you could actually do with taking weight off the bar and getting more out of that. But if you're a beginner, if you're not already particularly strong, applying that mindset is absolutely counterproductive. When you're advanced, I think this kind of optimal exercise selection, where you're really trying to isolate an area and work only that, makes a lot of sense. When you're more advanced, you've probably developed some strengths and some weaknesses. For example, my back, it was never a strength in my first few years of training. Just doing pull-ups, just doing basic pull-downs didn't really seem to cut it. Whereas, recently I've been adding in pull-arounds, one-arm pull-downs, really trying to work the lat, and things have been night and day compared to just doing these quote-unquote big basic movements. I'll have a full video on these sort of optimal exercises. I think they're really good. Brian Bornstein and Kasim of N1, I've been watching a lot of their stuff, and I think when you're advanced is the right time to pull this card. A lot of people are pulling these cards way earlier than they need to. I don't think that's necessarily detrimental, but I also think that focusing on the basics early is generally a good investment of effort and time and energy. You can do those exercises pretty much anywhere, whereas some of these exercises need a more specialized setup, and they just might not be worth the time and energy investment when you're a beginner. But when you're advanced, that's when they do make a ton of sense. Next, number 5, you might want to have specialization phases where you're targeting a certain area, not to the exclusion of others, but it's really going to be a focus during this, say, 2, 3, 4 month block. And this makes a lot more sense when you're advanced compared to when you're a beginner. Yes, you can target certain areas if you're a beginner. I don't see anything wrong with that. But you also probably don't need so much stress on a given area to grow it that you can only work your back in order to grow your back. No, you can grow everything as a beginner, and you probably should if you want to grow the most amount of muscle. Whereas when you're more advanced, it just takes a lot more stimulus. You're a lot more stubborn. You need more, or at least harder training, sometimes both, in order to grow a certain area. And so I think specialization phases make a lot more sense when you are advanced. Next, dieting, bulking, cutting, recomping. I think there's sort of 2 ways to think about this. First is that it's so much harder to build muscle that you need to give yourself every advantage. Therefore, bulking and cutting makes a lot more sense than recomping. The other one is that, well, you're not going to gain very much muscle anyway because you're advanced. And so if you're only going to gain, say, 2 pounds of muscle in a year, well, you don't need to give yourself this massive surplus and gain 20 or 30 pounds in a bulk and then lose it in a cut in order to facilitate that growth. I think there are grains of truth to both arguments, and it kind of depends on your goals. I think that if you don't mind getting fluffy...
Who told you about Fluffy?
Fluffy. That thing has a name?
That is certainly an option, as long as you are actually seeing the fruits of your labor each time you bulk and cut. If you bulk up a lot, and then you cut down, and you're kind of like, looking the same, maybe that won't make sense to repeatedly do in the future. Also, if you're a competitive natural bodybuilder where you have to be very lean as part of your sport, I don't think going up to 25% body fat really makes any kind of sense, because the journey on the way down is really going to suck. Also, you might lose the gains that you gained, and then you gained nothing. Number 7, you probably want more specific goals. If a beginner came to me and they're like, I want to get in shape, I want to be more jacked, that's pretty reasonable. That's totally fine. If an advanced guy came to me and they were like, I want to get more jacked, I'm like, okay, well, maybe some specific numbers that you want to hit in terms of either body weight or body fat percentage, FFMI, or in terms of like, oh, I want to hit this on the incline dumbbell for 8 reps. Like, you want something tangible and measurable that you can work towards. Like, I want to get in shape. You're already in shape. I want to get jacked. You're already jacked. Okay, so I think having something specific, manageable, and measurable to work towards, especially when that progress is maybe a little bit slower, is probably a good idea. Next, sort of in juxtaposition to that last one, number 8 is have a process-focused approach. Every advanced lifter that I've talked to, they enjoy training. They love training. They love what they do, and a lot of the reason why they do it, I think, is because they love it. They enjoy it. And so I think if you're a beginner, having a results-focused approach, hey, I want to get bigger so girls actually like me. Like, fair enough. But can you imagine if an advanced lifter said that kind of shit? Like, yeah, man, I got to get my FFMI from 24.5 to 25 so that girls will look my way. Like, what the fuck? Like, that's a little weird, right? Or, oh, yeah, I got to get jacked so I can defend myself. What? Get the fuck out of here. Like, that doesn't even make sense, really, when you're more advanced. Maybe if you're a competitive athlete, you can say, okay, I want to go from 5th in the world to top 3. Like, okay, fair enough. But I think still taking a process-focused approach and enjoying training and at least making sure that you're not just doing it for the outcome makes a lot more sense. Can you imagine if you see on some girl's Tinder bio, it's like 25 FFMI or get the fuck out of here. Flex your biceps? Just go. I'll pay for dinner, just I don't want to see that. Number 9, realize that you will have fewer sources of information when you are an advanced lifter. That's just the reality of it. I would say the vast majority of YouTube fitness content is aimed at beginners because that is by far the biggest audience, maybe intermediates. But when you're advanced, a lot of the information just doesn't either apply to you, or maybe it does apply to you, but you're already doing it. How many times have you read an article? It's like, all right, well, protein, sleep, effort, train harder than last time, calories in, calories out. God damn it, what the fuck? This is not, shit. And so I will be doing a series focusing on exactly how I train. Because sometimes you talk to advanced lifters and they know that the vast majority of their audience are beginners who don't need to hear the shit that you're actually doing. And so they say, like, consistency, that's important, calorie surplus, training hard, that kind of stuff. Like, that's what a beginner needs to hear. But I'm sure that if you're more advanced, you hear that kind of shit and you kind of just roll your eyes. So I will be doing more content that is for more advanced lifters. And actually, I like this kind of shit anyway, because I like seeing all these tiny gears and cogs move, and it's more complex, but it's also a lot more interesting to me. And so I will be doing more content for this kind of stuff. I'm looking forward to that. I hope you are as well. Finally, number 10, you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth it?
Is it worth it?
Is it worth it? Because now you're doing more effort, more time in the gym, more volume, harder, everything. You're tired and you need to focus on everything outside the gym as well. Your sleep, your stress management, all this stuff. It's more investment for less gains. As a beginner, it's not a huge investment and you're getting the most gains ever, right? If anything, it's a nice hook to try to get you in and stimulate you, huh? That hook is really what gets the job done. But is it worth it? So at a certain point, maybe you bulk up, you do everything very, very, very well, super dialed in, you cut down and you're like, maybe I gained a pound, I think. Like, all my measurements are the same, my strength is pretty much the same, I look pretty much the same, and I put a ton of hard work. And I know that maintaining is not too difficult. And so the answer might be to maintain. I realize that's not an ideologically palatable answer because we want to say, oh no, you got to max it out. You got to do everything to the limit. You got to reach your potential, blah, 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 blah. But no, you don't. There's nothing wrong with getting to be like an early intermediate or early advanced, late intermediate, and just sort of saying, all right, well, I look fucking good, I feel good, I enjoy training, I'm in a good place, and I think I'll maintain and do something else. Could be jujitsu, could be rock climbing, could be powerlifting. There are lots of options that have nothing to do with you gaining more muscle. If you are almost tapped out, I don't see anything wrong with tapping out. And I might spend 500 hours a year in the gym and gain a couple of pounds. That's not a lot of muscle. 2 grams of muscle per workout. It's 2 grams of muscle. I guess you only need 2 grams of protein per day. Anyway, I hope you liked the video. For a lot more about this kind of advanced training stuff, definitely check out either my book or maybe coaching. Don't everyone message me, but I would say that those are going to be the best resources. Either books, I hope all of you remember how to read. It's not as easy as it used to be, but certainly a useful skill. Or working with someone who is more advanced than you and can actually help guide you towards and through being advanced. Those are kind of going to be the best possible options. And YouTube might not be the best for this. Anyway, I hope you liked the video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.
You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall.